So, man, I pray that you all feel well and that not just physically, but also spiritually. How are you all doing spiritually? Can I ask you that? You okay? Oh, that wasn't too good. I was like, okay. Have you been spending time with the Lord? A little bit? Yeah. Spiritual vigor and spiritual life comes when you spend time with God. You just got to do it. There's no way around it. You just got to do it. In fact, just turn to your neighbor and say, you just got to do it. Just got to do it. Put your phone down. Shut down Instagram and Twitter and turn off Netflix. How about we have at least for the married couples, a worship and chill? How about that? Some of y'all know what I'm talking about. For the singles, it's just worship. No chill. But you got to spend time. I'm realizing that. I've been pastoring for 13 years, and I'm realizing that more and more. There's no way of getting around it. You can't phone it in. You have to spend time with God in His presence. Whether that's early in the morning or whether it's late at night or whether that's you get away on your break at work, you find some time throughout the day to just connect. It's important for your own spiritual life, for your spiritual vigor. Not praying is like not breathing. After a while, you'll just die. Yeah. And you don't feel it because you're still alive physically, but your spirit is wilting. It's like one of those plants, those wax plants that you buy from Home Depot or from Target. You don't water them, they'll just kind of wilt over. As soon as you put some water in it, 10 minutes later, it's back up, right? It's the same thing with your spiritual life. You have to spend time. That's not what my message is about today, but I just felt someone needed to hear that. Today I want to continue with where we left off last week. Last week we talked about how God's not afraid of your mess. And this week I want to continue. But this week I want to talk more so on the topic of vision, as we've been in the For the City campaign and the For the City series. And as you know, we are being for our city. We are for Garden Grove. We are for Anaheim. We are for Tustin. We are for, where else? Santa Ana. We are for Irvine. We are for Brea. We are for Huntington Beach and Westminster. Anybody for Riverside? Whoop, whoop. We're for Riverside too. Where you live and where you work, we want to be for the city. We want to see God's prosperity and God's peace and God's grace in the area in which He has called us to serve. Now, we recognize on the front side, we were very clear. The Bible tells us that this world is only going to get worse. We recognize that. And so I'm not suggesting that us being for the city is somehow going to try to bring about prosperity in the city where there's no more crime and no more sin. We know that's counter what the Bible teaches. The Bible teaches us that the world is going to progressively get worse and worse. In fact, it says it in these words. It says, the love of many shall wax cold. Right, which means that you're going to see craziness continue to increase, and all manner of evil and ungodliness is going to continue to be perpetuated from one generation to the next. In fact, some could argue that this generation is worse than the last generation, and that the last generation was worse than the generation before. Some could argue that. I think the point, though, is that as we approach the coming of the Lord, and you do believe that the Lord is coming, as we approach the coming of the Lord, that the times will get worse. So what do we mean when we say for the city? What we essentially are saying is that we are for the people in the city, right? That we are for our neighbors and our co-workers and our classmates and our baristas and our barbers and the person who does our nails and the person who gives us a pedicure and our manicure, the people that we go to, the person who we drop our laundry off at. We're for that person. We want to see them prosper and experience all that God has in store for them. We want to be individuals who are rescuing people from the kingdom of darkness and bringing them into the kingdom of light. So when we say we are for the city, we are for the inhabitants of the city, the people who live there and dwell there, because we know that Christ is for those people. That Christ came and He died for those people, and He's coming back for those people. And if those people are lost, Christ will shed a tear in heaven over them. We're told that, and I believe that. And so we want to be for the people in the city. And so that's why I have been urging and pleading with you all to join our For the City initiative and identify just 4 people in your radius that you can serve and that you can speak to and that you can minister to and that you can pour into, so that hopefully by your influence, they will come to know Christ. Amen, somebody. Well, today I want to talk about vision because 3 weeks ago, we rolled out where we're going in 5 years, how we want to bring life and power to our radius. We talked about how we want to go into the marketplace and how we want to take our city by storm. We want to set up businesses and entities where we can rub shoulders with the community, and through rubbing shoulders with them, we can then invite them to come and follow Christ as we're following Christ. We've talked about that, but not just do we have a vision for our church, but I believe that you should, and that you probably do also have a vision for your life, right? Many of you all, you know exactly where you want to go. You have a vision for your children, for your grandchildren. You want to see them saved. Does anyone in here say, I want to see my children saved? I want to see my loved ones. I want to see my spouse. I want to see my siblings. I want to see them in the kingdom. And yet what I found is that this thing called Christianity, what it requires of us so often, more than we would like, is Christianity requires us to wait. Can you just say wait? Do I got a witness in the house who can say, yep, God, yep, that's how God operates? In fact, it reminds me of my daughters, how they are just 3, 4, 5, 6 years old. I don't have 4. I only have 3. They're 3, 5, 6 years old. Don't give me another one. No, I can't do it. I get shortness of breath just thinking about it. And at this age, the one thing that is characteristic of who they are is they are impatient. Say impatient. They want what they want when they want it, right when they want it. Just like I want to say mama, but it's more likely their daddy. They want when they want, and if it takes too long for it to come, if they're hungry and they want breakfast, and breakfast isn't happening soon enough, all hell is going to break loose. If they're ready to go and we're not going fast enough, all hell will break loose. If they're trying to get dressed in the morning and I'm not moving fast enough, or their mama's not moving fast enough, all hell breaks loose. Sounds like that little one right there. He wants what he wants when he wants it. That's just the nature of kids. And what I found is that it's very similar with the body of Christ, is that when I look through the scriptures and the historical texts, I found that every person who has ever followed God had to wait. It's just core to this thing called Christianity. And I don't know why God builds in waiting in the process of coming to know him, but he does. And waiting it's a part of our growth process. It's a part of what it means to become an adult. It's a part of what it means to become a follower of Christ. You've heard it said before that if something is worth having, it's worth waiting for, that we are told that when it comes to dating that we should wait before we should wait on having sex until we're married, which I firmly agree with and support. We're told that we should wait for certain things in life, that we don't have to have everything right away. And so it is with God, that when you look through the text, people who follow God had to wait. I mean, just take Noah, for example. God came to Noah one day and said, Noah, I want you to build an ark for the saving of your family. And Noah then asked the question, well, when will this rain come? And God's response to him was 120 years. You have to wait. And then once Noah built the ark and he went into the ark, how long did Noah have to wait before the rain actually came? 7 days. He waited. It's just a part of what it means to follow God, is that you have to wait for some things. Take Abraham, for example. Abraham was visited by the angels, and Abraham, when he was around, I think he was around 60, 70, maybe 75 years old, God came, maybe a little bit older, God came to Abraham and said, Abraham, you're going to have a child. And Abraham had no children. His wife Sarah had no children. She was barren. She was 70, 75 years old herself. And they actually laughed at the angels. They said, is it possible for me to get pleasure from my husband? Is it possible for me to actually have a child? And Abraham literally had to wait 25 years before the promise became a reality. That when you follow God and when you follow the promises of God, nothing happens right when you want it to happen. Think about Joseph, for example. Joseph is another individual who he received a dream when he was around 16, 17 years old, that one day he saw in a dream that his brothers and his father would be bowing down to him. He didn't actually see them. He saw stalks of wheat, and Joseph's stock of wheat was standing up, and all of his brothers and his father's stocks of wheat started bowing down. And Joseph had this dream. He went and he told his father this dream, and they mocked him and they scoffed him. But Joseph believed that something was very unique about this dream. And yet, if you read Joseph's story in the book of Genesis, you realize that it took 13 years for that dream to come to pass. And that during that 13-year period, Joseph found himself betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, betrayed by Potiphar's wife, placed in prison. Like all the things that were happening in his life were reinforcing that your dream will never come to pass. And I can imagine that there may have been times when Joseph felt as though he should abandon the promise of God. And yet he held on. And he waited. And can you imagine how Joseph felt when he saw now he is vice pharaoh of Egypt, and he sees his brothers coming to him, and they don't recognize who he is because he's clothed and they think he's dead. But here they come to him and they bow down. Can you imagine how Joseph felt when he begins to realize that, wow, the dream I had 13 years ago has just come to pass? If you follow the promises of God, it will require you to wait. Turn to your neighbor and say, some things are just worth waiting for. Some things are just worth waiting for. This teaches us that God does not always show up when you want him to show up. And I want to be sensitive, because I realize with this point that this is like one of the characteristics of God. You know, the Bible says that a day with the Lord is as 1,000 years. Right? And so there's that old story when someone said, Lord, I need something. And the Lord answered and said, sure, I'll come. And the guy responded, God, when are you going to come? And the Lord said, I'm going to come today. And he said, well, what does today actually mean? He's like, well, today. Well, today for me is today, but today for God is 1,000 years. That's what the Bible tells us, that a day to the Lord is like 1,000 years. That there's just something that God does not feel compelled by our timetable. He does not feel driven to show up when we want him to, how we want him to, at the exact moment we want him to. I mean, come on now, let's be honest. How many of us in here would have wished that God would have showed up last week already? Like, you've been praying about some things, and you've been like, God, enough is enough already. I mean, I don't know how more broke I can get than this, God. Can you show up already? I don't know how much more anxiety I can handle. I don't know how much more stress I can deal with. God, if you would just show up. And I believe that there are a large group of individuals who are not walking with God today for this very reason. They prayed about something. God did not show up when they felt he should, and so they threw in the towel on their walk with the Lord. You may know some. I know some. You may have been in that category. I was almost in that category where I prayed and I prayed and I prayed, and it didn't show up the way I wanted it to, how I wanted to. And I felt like, well, man, God, if you're not going to be true to your promise, as you say you're going to be true to your promise, when I want you to be true to your promise, then why am I even doing this thing? And there are many today who do not walk with God because they feel as though God does not answer their prayers. And yet the reality is we don't follow God because God shows up and answers our prayers when we want him to answer our prayers. We follow God because he showed up on Calvary. He showed up on Calvary, y'all. He said, listen. The one thing I have to do for humanity is I'm going to send my son. And at the appointed time, at the right moment, when all the prophecy was being fulfilled, he sent his son to die for us. Let the church say amen. And yet, I understand, and I'm not going to make excuses for God, that there are many of us in here who are living right now with disappointment in our spiritual life because you've been asking for something. Maybe you've been praying for a husband. You've been praying for a wife. Maybe you've been praying to get into your school, get into the program. Maybe you have some debt that is crushing you, and you've been claiming the promises of God, the promises which declare that my God shall supply all of your needs. And you're like, God, you say in your word you're going to supply all of your needs. God, where are you right now? Why aren't you showing up right now in my life? Maybe you're battling some type of health challenge, and yet you're claiming the promise that we serve a God who heals all of our diseases. But God, I have a disease that you have not healed. God, where are you? Why have you not showed up? Many of us have laid loved ones into the grave and have buried individuals, still holding on to the promise that somehow God would come through for them, and yet God did not come through for them the way we thought he should. And so we sit here in our seats. We're here because we want to be here, but there's a part of us that still just wrestles with God. I don't fully understand your ways. And I don't understand really how to operationalize this word. Like, I don't know how this thing actually makes sense, because your word says, whatever we believe, praying that we shall receive it, we have received it, we shall receive it. And yet, God, I've prayed for some things that I have not yet received. Where are you, God? And we, like the disciples, are probably only here because we recognize that, listen, I have nowhere else to go. But if there was a better option out there, I might just find myself leaving the church too. I recognize. And yet the Bible does tell us that all things work together for good. And so the fact that we are here and we are still standing and we're still in this place lets us know that God has not given up on us, and that we should not give up on God. Because all things will work together for good. You know, it's like that old song, you'll understand it in the by and by, right? Like when the road is called up yonder and all things are come to pass, then you'll have a full understanding. Like we hold on to that hope that while it doesn't make sense to me right now, God, I trust that at your appointed time, you're going to show up and you're going to make this thing clear to me. We also recognize as Christians that we're not always going to get what we pray for. In fact, the Bible tells us that in this world, you shall have tribulation. You're going to go through some stuff. Some of it is your own doing. Come on now, be honest. Others of it is something that happened to you, but the Bible is very clear. In this world, you shall have tribulation. But he reassures us in John. He says, but be of good cheer. I have overcome the world. So while, yes, we lay our loved ones to rest, and while, yes, we sometimes have disappointing nights, and while, yes, it doesn't always make sense to us what God is doing and why God is doing it or what he's not doing, we still have the blessed assurance that, you know what, it's better to be with God with all of my questions than to leave him. And so we hold on. And yet I am well aware, through my own experience and through having talked with many of you in here today, the reality of having prayed for something that you are now waiting on God for, and that waiting period can be discouraging, it can be frustrating, and it can cause serious doubt. And yet this waiting period is not new to followers of Christ, as I've said, and this is exactly where we find ourselves today in our text of Habakkuk in chapter 1. I want to take you there. I don't know if you know much about Habakkuk. Habakkuk was what we call a minor prophet. He wrote the book of Habakkuk, and he was a prophet during the time of Judah, to Judah, where the people of God were acting all types of crazy. They were immoral and foolish, and sin was rampant throughout the nation. And Habakkuk was a prophet, and Habakkuk didn't understand what God was going. And we're going to walk through the entire book today, and hopefully it'll provide some clarity to how God works and what we should do in the process. But I want to just start with Habakkuk in chapter 1, and I want to start with verse 2, and I'm going to read from the New International Version of Habakkuk, the New Living Translation of Habakkuk chapter 1 and verse 2. It should be on the screen. It's in the back. There it is. The text says, this is the message that the prophet Habakkuk received in vision. And then he says this. He says, how long, O Lord, must I call for help? Have you ever find yourself in prayer? I mean, we only got to verse 2, but you're already like, yes, I'm right with Habakkuk. Yes. My brother, he knows exactly what he's talking about. Habakkuk's like, how long, O God? How long, O God? How long must I call for help? But you do not listen. He says, violence is everywhere, and I cry, but you do not come to save. Must I forever see these evil deeds? Why must I watch all of this misery? Wherever I look, I see destruction, he says, and violence. I am surrounded by people who love to argue and to fight. The law has become paralyzed, and there is no justice in the courts. And the wicked far outnumber the righteous, so that justice has become perverted. So here, Habakkuk, and we're not even going to read the entire section. Habakkuk is just like, God, what are you doing, and why are you not showing up? He's like, I'm tired of immorality running rampant in the streets. I'm tired of the foolishness that's going on in the city. He's crying out to God for help. He's wanting God to show up, but it appears that there is no answer. The prophet did not understand what God was doing or why he was doing it. And then what's interesting is that God responds to Habakkuk. God responds, and in verse 5 of chapter 1, God says, the Lord replied. He says, look around at the nations. Look and be amazed. For I am doing something in your own day, something that you won't believe, even if someone told you about it. And then verse 6 is where he comes with his response, with his answer, with his solution to Habakkuk's complaint. Because Habakkuk is saying, God, why aren't you going to set your people right and do what's right in the eyes of the prophets? And God says, okay, Habakkuk, I'm about to show you what I'm about to do. And in verse 6, he says, I am raising up the Babylonians, a cruel and violent people. They will march across the world and conquer other lands. Well, we're not going to read the entire section, but essentially God goes on to say, Habakkuk, I hear what you're saying. I see that you're tired of all the sin and all of the destruction. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to send the Babylonians to issue judgment on my people. Now, to us, we're like, oh, okay, God, if that's what you decide to do. But to Habakkuk, that's even worse than what he thought. Habakkuk's like, hold on, God. Like, we are your people. We are Judah. We're your children. Like, why would you send this pagan nation, the Babylonians, to issue judgment on us? God, why don't you do it another way? And so now Habakkuk is even struggling with God's response. He's like, I don't like the way that you're going about this thing, God. Have you been there before? Where you prayed for something and then God responds, but yet you don't really like the way that he responds, or you don't like the plan. I feel like that happens to me all the time. Like, I'm just like, God, I have this issue with someone. Can you just take them out and can you just remove them from the situation? And God's like, no, I want you to go and actually talk to them. God, but why? Just take them out. Just remove them. And God's like, no. I need you to have a conversation. It's almost like every time I want God to do something, he does the exact opposite. And it makes no sense to me. It's just like, God, but for crying out loud, God, can't you just do it my way just once? God responds according to his plan. God responds according to his plan. And his plans to us rarely ever make sense. In fact, this is how Isaiah says it. In Isaiah 55, Isaiah comes, and this is what God says to Isaiah. He says, Isaiah, my thoughts are nothing like your thoughts, says the Lord, and my ways are far beyond anything that you can imagine. For just as the heavens are higher than the earth, so my ways are higher than your ways, and my thoughts are higher than your thoughts. God is like, listen, when I come in and I show up in your life, I just want you to understand that I don't operate the way that you operate, right? Because you think 1 + 1 is 2, but I think 1 + 1 is infinity. And so the way that I do things are far different than the way that you want me to do things. And so you just have to get accustomed to the fact that God operates on his own timetable. He operates according to his own plan. He has his own purposes. He has his own ideas and his own visions and what he wants to do. And the sooner you can come to grips with that reality, the more at peace you can be that, you know what, it's going to be okay. Even though I fully don't understand why he's doing what he's doing, I trust that when it's all said and done, it will work out for my good and for his glory. If you can just get to that point in your own spiritual life, when it comes to your children and to your marriage and to every area of your life, as you go into your prayer closet, seeking God and petitioning him to show up and to move in a certain way, just know that whatever he chooses to do is probably going to be different than what you want him to do, but it will be in your best interest. And this is what Habakkuk is realizing. That God is like, Habakkuk, I hear your prayer, but I'm not going to do things the way you want me to do things. For yes, the Babylonians are wicked and evil, but I will have judgment on them as well. You don't know my thoughts, and you don't know my ways. So stop trying to play God. When Habakkuk receives this word from the Lord, Habakkuk is like, for real? I mean, look at the text. He says it right there. He's like in verse 12 of chapter 1. Habakkuk is like, oh, Lord, my God, my Holy One, you who are eternal, surely you do not plan to wipe us out. Oh, Lord, our rock, you have sent these Babylonians to correct us, to punish us for our many sins. But you are pure and cannot stand the sight of evil. Why would you use the Babylonians? Will you wink at their treachery? The Babylonians aren't any better than us. Why would you use them? Should we be silent while the wicked, he says, swallow up people more righteous than they? Are we only fish to be caught and killed? Are we only sea creatures that have no leader? Must we be strung up on their hooks and caught in their nets while they rejoice and celebrate? Habakkuk is really bothered and frustrated by God's plans. And so this is what Habakkuk decides to do. He says, you know what? God, clearly your ways are higher than my ways, and clearly your thoughts are better than my thoughts. And some could argue that well, you know what you're doing. We believe. And so this is what I'm going to do. And he tells us in Habakkuk chapter 2 and verse 1, he goes on to say, he says, this is what I'm going to do. I'm just going to climb up to my watchtower and stand at my guard post, and there I will wait to see what the Lord says and how he will answer my complaint. Habakkuk is like, you know what? I'm not even gonna try to reason this thing, God. I don't understand what you're doing, so I'm just gonna find a chair and I'm just gonna sit and I'm just gonna wait on you. I'm just gonna let you have your way. And then Habakkuk gets another response from God, and this is what God says in verse 2 of chapter 2. This is from the New King James Version. He says, "Then the Lord answered me and said, write the vision and make it plain on tablets, that he may run who reads it. For the vision is yet for an appointed time, but at the end it will speak and it will not lie. Though it tarries, wait for it, because it will surely come. It will not tarry." God is basically saying, Habakkuk, what I said is what I said. Have you ever heard that response from your parents? Sounds like something your mama would say. Child, what I said is what I said. Don't ask me again. You need to write down what I said and make sure that you don't forget it. Because when it comes to pass, as it will come to pass, then you will know that I wasn't lying, but I was telling the truth. Here, Habakkuk finds himself in the midst of this waiting period. And you and I often find ourselves in the middle of a waiting period where we've prayed for something and we receive a promise from God that he will deliver, that he will show up, that he will move and he will speak, but it hasn't materialized in our life as we would hope it would according to our timetable. And so here we see what God essentially tells Habakkuk. And there's just a few points that I want to pull from this text that I think can apply to our lives, and then we'll be on our way. The first is that whenever you are praying for something and you receive a promise from God about what he is going or will do in your life, the first thing you must do, according to the text, is you must write it down. Say, write it down. Don't just write it down, but put it on a billboard, right? Put it on a billboard and make sure that you never lose sight of what the word of the Lord is for you in this season. This is important because in so many individuals, I believe, have fallen away from God because we have stopped taking our eyes off of the promise of God. And we started placing our eyes on the situation. But as he said to Habakkuk, write this thing down, put it plainly on the tablets so that everyone who reads it will be able to run. Everyone who reads it will be able to understand exactly what I'm going to do and exactly how I'm going to do it. It doesn't have to make sense to you, but write the vision that God has given you. Write the response that God has given you down. If you believe and have been praying for God for healing for your loved one, if you believe and have been praying for God for deliverance for your finances, if you believe and have been praying to God that he would show up in your life in a specific way, take the promise of God and write it on a billboard. Put it on the forefront of your mind. I don't advocate tattoos, but I would even say tattoo it on your forearm, so that you never forget and you will never question or doubt what God said to you. Because the reality is that what happens to many of us is that one of the reasons we fall away is because we stopped looking at the word, the promise, the vision. We feel as though he hasn't showed up yet, and so he's probably not going to show up, and we lose heart. But if you tattoo it on the forefront of your mind, it will keep you focused. It's almost like, the only way I can try to relate this thing is it's like driving down the demonic 91. Jeremiah has been there with me as we both travel down to our church office and have to travel back. And a lot of times what happens while I'm sitting on the 91, especially if for whatever reason I missed the fast track. It happened a few weeks ago, my wife and I don't know what happened, but the direction that we were coming, somehow we missed the fast track and we were just caught in 91 traffic, and it was literally bumper to bumper. And what's so crazy about the 91, especially when you miss the fast track, is that you can look over just one lane and the fast track is wide open. And cars are just flying by. But you just sitting there, bumper to bumper traffic. And yet what I realize while I'm sitting there is that I am being forced to wait. Oh yeah. Patience. I'll eventually get to my destination, but I won't get to my destination as quickly as I would have hoped to get to my destination because of my situation. There's cars in front of me, there's cars behind me, there's cars on every side of me. I have to wait. But while I'm waiting, Jerry, something I have never, ever, ever considered doing is getting off the highway and turning around. That never even crosses my mind to go in the opposite direction. The reason it doesn't cross my mind is because I recognize that the destination is worth the wait. Y'all gonna get it probably tomorrow while y'all are sitting on the 91. Where I'm going is far more important than what I'm going through right now. You see, when I'm on the 91, I recognize that where I'm going is to my home, where my bed is, where my wife is, and where my family is. And so getting to that destination is far more important and far outweighs whatever frustration I'm currently experiencing in the moment. And so I don't think, well, let me just turn around and go back to the church office. No. While I love the church, there is nothing back there for me. Right. I want to go home. Right. And so I will sit there and I will endure sometimes 30, sometimes 40, sometimes 60 minutes of just waiting in traffic because I recognize that where I'm going is of far more value than to where I am right now currently. And that's just a word for someone, is that when you are in the waiting period for God in your life and you've been praying about something and you've been fasting about something and you've been crying out to him about something and it seems as though he has you in a waiting period, don't ever consider turning around, because I want you to realize that where God is taking you is far greater and far more precious than where you've come from. And that wherever you're going, it is worth the wait. And so I think about our church, and I think about where we're going and what our 5-year plan is and where God is moving us. And I say to myself, listen, there's no way that we're going backwards, because where we're going is worth whatever we're going through right now. Whatever moments of tension or misunderstandings or frustration or wrestling with this thought and that thought, whatever we're going through right now is far worth the wait, because I believe in where God is leading us. And you just have to have that level of reassurance and confidence in your own life that where God is taking you is much more precious than what you are currently enduring right now. Do I have a witness? It's just worth it. It's just worth it. And that's the nature of all visions, whether it's in your life or in your family or even your church, that getting to a destination, it takes time. Visions tarry. And yet I recognize that impatience is the normal human response to God's plan and God's promises. But don't grow impatient, but wait for the vision and the promise that God has given your life. This reminds me of Hebrews in chapter 10, where the author of Hebrews says to us in Hebrews in chapter 10, he says, "Do not throw away your confidence, for it will be richly rewarded." You need to persevere so that when you have done the will of God, he says, you will receive what he has promised. For in just a little while, he who is coming will come, and he will not delay. Don't throw away your confidence. You have need of persevering. Hold on to what God is calling you to do, because in a little while, he who shall come, he will come, and he will not tarry. So while we wait, we have faith, and we believe that God's purpose and God's plans, though we don't understand them, he will work it out in his time. Do I have a witness in the house of God? So Habakkuk waited and waited. And the word of the Lord came to Habakkuk and said, Habakkuk, the vision tarries, but write it down and wait for it. For though it tarries, it will come to pass. And then God says something to Habakkuk that I believe is so, it serves as the foundation for our own walk with the Lord. He says this in Habakkuk chapter 2 and verse 4. He says, behold the proud, his soul is not upright in him. But then he says this, he says, but the just shall live by faith. It says that those who are being made righteous, that the one thing that will characterize your life is not that you get everything you want when you want it. It's not that every time you cry out to God that he answers immediately. But the thing that characterizes the righteous is that you live a life waiting on God by faith. Where you say, it doesn't make sense, and I know I've been praying for this, and I don't know when he's going to move, and I don't know if he's going to move, but I just believe, I'm holding on. I believe that in God's time, according to God's purpose, it will come to pass. This is what we do. We wait by faith. That's what makes us different as Christians. That's what keeps us holding on. It's because we recognize it doesn't always make sense. And my prayers aren't always answered the way I would like them to. But God does answer them according to his timetable by faith. So we wait. Doesn't matter how long it takes God to move. We wait. Doesn't matter what's happening around us. We wait. And while we're waiting, we believe that God will come through at the right time. What exactly is the right time? What was the right time for the 3 Hebrew boys when they were being thrown into the fiery furnace? I would think that the right time would be before they actually went to the furnace. But the right time for the 3 Hebrew boys was not before they went to the furnace, but the right time for the 3 Hebrew boys was when they actually were being placed in the furnace. What is the right time for Daniel when he was being thrown into the lion's den? I would have said, no, God, the right time is before he actually gets to the lion's den. But God showed up and said, no, the right time is for when Daniel is actually in the lion's den. What is the right time for David when he was facing Goliath? I would have thought that the right time would have been before he approached Goliath. But God said, no, I'm going to show up when you're facing your greatest threat and you're facing your greatest giant. That's when I will show up. So while we wait believing that God will show up. What is the right time for your loved one who has cancer? We would think obviously God is before it becomes terminal. Obviously God is before they're on hospice. Obviously God is before they breathe their last breath. But God says, no. The right time is not according to your timetable. The right time is according to my timetable. For I know what the right time is. You see, because we judge our situation based on what we see right in front of us. But the old song says he's got the whole world in his hands. So God knows that if I move right now, and yes, I might deliver you from this situation, there's 2 or 3 other situations that are going on around you that you know not of that would affect me delivering you right now would affect those situations. And so I'm waiting for everything to line up and for everyone to be in the right position so that when I do show up, it will be very clear that it was only by the grace of God. That's just how God operates. That's how God moves. He doesn't show up to keep us from trauma. He shows up while we are in the midst of trauma. And if you're sitting here and you're saying to yourself, but yes, I really needed God to prevent me from going through this, I would say to you, he did prevent you. He is holding you while you are going through it. And that he is keeping you every single step of the way. And if you are here today, or if you're watching online and there is still air in your lungs, and there is still a shred of cognitive ability that you have to reason your situation, understand that God is with you. This is what the psalmist tells us when he says, or the prophet tells us when he says, though when I pass through the waters, thou would be with me. And through the fires, I will not be burned. And when all hell breaks loose around me, God, I trust and I know that you will be there every single step of the way. That we don't serve a God who tries to kind of caress us and keep us away from evil and keep us away from trials. No, we serve a God who says, even when you're going through that tough situation, I will be there with you. So wait for it. Wait for it. Wait for his time. Wait for his blessing. Wait for his grace. Wait for his providence. Sit in eager anticipation and wait and write the promise of God on the forefront of your minds and never forget what God is trying to do in your life. Because what the devil wants you to do is the devil wants you to get discouraged in your waiting. He wants you to look at your circumstances and say, well, clearly God hasn't shown up for you. Why don't you just give up and throw in the towel on God and just abandon him? That's the devil's MO. But God says, no. If you just hold on and wait a little while longer, he that shall come will come, and he will not tarry. God's time is always the right time. So there's a couple in here who've been trying to get pregnant. And you feel like, God, what are you doing? My eggs are getting old. That's real. I feel like my time is passing. God would remind you that Sarah gave birth when she was 75. You're saying, God, no, I don't want it. Lord, I don't want it. No. Even Sarah laughed at God. She said, there's someone in here who is thinking about going back to school and you've applied to the program, you're not getting in, you're saying, God, I'm about to age out of this thing. And God is saying, I'm not on your timetable. Maybe I want you to go back when you're well past the age of everyone else. There's someone in here who you're contemplating your marriage and you're not sure what's going to happen. You've been praying that God will show up and nothing has happened and you're not sure which way to go. And God is just saying, don't move until I tell you to move. Wait for it. God's timing is perfect. And I'm not saying that because I personally experience God always showing up when I want him to show up. But I'm saying that to you by faith, believing that God always shows up right on time. So Habakkuk wrestles with God. God tells him, Habakkuk, just wait for it. The vision will tarry, but just wait. It will come to pass. And then Habakkuk begins to have this prayer conversation with God where he begins to wrestle with God a little bit. And then towards the end of the book of Habakkuk, Habakkuk just realizes that, you know what, God is right on time all of the time. And so Habakkuk chapter 3, he says this in verse 17, and I love this text. It's one of my favorite. Habakkuk then reasons. He says, though the fig tree may not blossom, nor fruit be on the vines, though the labor of the olive may fail, and the fields yield no food, though the flock may be cut off from the fold, and there be no herd in the stalls. This is what Habakkuk says. Yet will I rejoice in the Lord. I will joy in the God of my salvation. Habakkuk is essentially saying that though my circumstances are not working out, and it appears as though all the worst situations are happening, and though my circumstances are less than ideal, Habakkuk says, I will still rejoice in the Lord. Why? Because my praise and my worship and my connection and my loyalty to God cannot, is not, and shall never be contingent on my circumstances. And that's when you know you're moving closer to God by faith. That's when you know you're beginning to grow as a spiritual individual and as a Christian. When you recognize that, wow, even though all hell is breaking loose, and even though I have no money in the bank, and things are not happening, and my marriage is failing, and my kids are acting a fool, and yet I find myself drawing closer and closer and closer to God in spite of all of the drama I'm going on in my personal life. That's when you know you're taking steps closer to God. Because this Christian walk isn't about everything happening the way you would like it, when you would like it. No, this Christian walk is about you holding on by faith. And so if I could summarize it, and I just want to summarize it real quick for you, like in a few points of the entire book of Habakkuk. And I want to show you this. The first thing, if you can see it, the first thing is the prophet is upset. And he's asking God why he doesn't do something. That's like chapter 1. And then God shows up and he responds. You can go to the next one. God responds by indicating that he's about to raise up the Babylonians. Okay, that's not exactly what Habakkuk's response that he wanted from God. He doesn't like God's response nor God's plan. And so then if you keep reading, Habakkuk then, next slide. The Lord tells him, I gotta wait, huh? The Lord tells him to have both patience and faith. And then he concludes, Habakkuk then resolves to trust the Lord regardless of the circumstances. Like this is the entire book of Habakkuk summed up in one slide. And this, to a large degree, is like your entire life summed up, where God comes in and you are asking why questions. God, why aren't you doing this? And why haven't you worked this out? And so then God comes in and he says, well, listen, I'm going to work some stuff out in your life, but it's not going to be the way that you want me to work some stuff out in your life. And then we respond by saying, but God, why would you do it like that? That doesn't make any sense. I didn't ask for it to be done like that. I don't want to be done like that. But then we begin to realize that God is telling us, listen, just have patience and faith. Trust me, I know what I'm doing. And though you're in the middle of the crucible and it doesn't feel comfortable and you're not happy with your situation, just hold on and wait for it, because then you will realize that I work all things out for good, and we will then resolve to trust the Lord regardless of the circumstances. The question is, are you able to make it to this fifth point? Or when the Lord tells us to have patience and faith, do we then throw in the towel and abandon the vision? Or do we say, God, I'm going to have faith and I'm going to trust regardless of my circumstances? I will trust you. That's the point today. Regardless of the circumstances, will you trust God? Regardless of what's happening around you, will you wait on him? Will you believe him? I'm going to close now, and my prayer is that we would grow in our faith, and that we would truly assume the posture that says, no matter what's happening around me, I will bless the Lord at all times. This is what I see when I read through the book of Hebrews, and Hebrews is a chapter, Hebrews chapter 11, of faith that really just lays out for us the men and women who have lived lives of such boldness and courage and valor. And when you look at Hebrews in chapter 11, the first half, and I've shared this before, the first half of Hebrews 11 really details individuals who have done great and mighty things. Noah and Abraham and all of the great things that these individuals have accomplished. But then when you read the last half of Hebrews in chapter 11, it starts talking about people who died horrible deaths and who didn't make it over. And what's interesting about this last half of Hebrews 11 is that it ends with a particular verse. And it ends with a particular verse in chapter 11, verse 39 and 40. And if you could put that there, it says, and he's talking about, specifically, he's talking about individuals who have died. And he says, all these have obtained a good testimony through faith. They did not receive the promise. God having provided something better for us, that we should not be made perfect apart from us. They should not be made perfect apart from us. What this is essentially saying is that there's a whole list of individuals who died holding on and waiting for God to do something, waiting for the promise. They died waiting for the promise. And yet God still looks at them and says, these were all commended for their faith, yet even though none of them received the promise. I wish this Christian life was of such that everything that we believed would happen in our day, but there are some things that won't happen in our day. And there are some things, some of us will die not having seen the very things that we were holding on and praying and believing God for. And yet what's important about that moment is that God will look at us and he will still say, here are these who, though they did not get what they asked for, they are commended for their faith, for they died waiting. They died waiting. And so my appeal to you and my point for today's message today is that you and I would be men and women who wait for it. That we don't throw in the towel on God because it's not working out, but that we wait even to our very last breath. We wait for the promise of God. Even when it doesn't seem like it's working out, we wait for the purpose of God. Even when it feels as though the walls are closing in around us and we're getting shortness of breath, we still wait on the plan of God. And we respond like the disciples who say, God, you are all that I have. There's nowhere else I can go. Like I will wait for you by faith. God, I'm going to wait for you with my children. I'm going to wait for you in my marriage. I'm going to wait for you in my finances. I'm going to wait for you on my job, in my professional life. And even if it doesn't work out the way I would hope, God, Lord, I am not throwing in the towel. I am waiting. I am waiting. Every head is bowed, every eye is closed. Father, in this moment, we are human and we get discouraged. We walk by faith. We try to walk by faith, but too often we walk by what we see. Father, in the name of Jesus, we want to wait for your promise. We want to believe that you are able to do exceedingly abundantly above all that we ask or think. We want to be men and women who live by faith and walk by faith and who aren't tossed to and fro by the circumstances that we're in or the situations that we face, but we are individuals whose minds are resolute, who have dropped the anchor of our soul into your word and have said, Lord, I will not be moved from this position, but we will wait on you. And so, God, I just want to pray for your people right now, because there are some who are just barely holding on. They feel as though they've been praying and nothing has happened, and they're only here today maybe just because they're giving you one last chance. And God, I'm just praying that you would just reassure them to continue to hold on, to not give up, to not allow the circumstances around them to dictate their walk or their commitment with you. But even though it may look like it's getting worse, that they would take this as a cue to draw close to you, to pull close to your purpose and your plan. God, that you would just give us a resolute mind and a determined heart that we will follow you. And so, Father God, we surrender our fears, our doubts, and even though it doesn't always make sense, we place it in your hands. And we thank you. And may we be like Habakkuk, who says, though the tree doesn't blossom and the flower doesn't bloom and it doesn't look like this situation is happening or that situation is happening, yet we will rejoice in the God of our salvation. This is our prayer in Jesus' name. Let everyone who believes say amen.